In 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1, there has been in my heart lately, over the last 6 weeks, a real desire to bring Bible prophecy because we are living in a very dramatic time. And how do we know that it's not the time that the last 7 years may be about to begin? We do know the Bible says there's going to be a scattering of the holy people. Could it be that that time has begun? But in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1, it says, "This know also, that in the last days perilous times shall come." The word perilous means dangerous. So the writer of this book, Timothy, told us under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit that when the last days come, there will be dangerous times. And remember, this is the book to Israel. It's Israel's God that is the one that inspired it. These books were sent mainly to the lost tribes of Israel, to those that were scattered around, and many attended the churches in Gentile areas as the churches were raised up. In Luke chapter 21, there are scriptures that are very puzzling to our mind, but today I hope to answer some of the questions pertaining to these scriptures. Luke 21 verse 25 and 26 says, "And there shall be signs in the sun, and in the moon, and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations with complexity, and the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear and for looking after those things which shall come on the earth. For the powers of heaven shall be shaken." The word perplexity means that it's going to be no way out. Mankind will eventually come to the point where they see no way of escaping human annihilation. That's just the way it's going to be, whether we like it or not. God has prophesied it. He's laid it down in the pages of the Bible. And whatever He says, it's going to happen. It's just a matter of whether we have our lives right so that we will be accounted worthy to escape all of these things that are out to come. But there is another verse in Revelation chapter 6, verse 12. It says, "I beheld when He had opened the sixth seal, and lo, there was a great earthquake." So here was an earthquake that is so powerful that it sent up ash and so on into the air. I'm sure this will probably be combined with volcanic activity. But it'll block the display of the sun and the moon from a portion of the human race, wherever they're closest to it. Why would a great earthquake come? Jesus told us in Matthew 24 that there would be one of the signs was earthquakes. But how will they happen? When will they happen? Revelation chapter 8, verse 7 through 12, it discusses the 7 last trumpets. And in verse 7, when the first angel sounded, it tells us clearly that there's going to be something like a comet that's coming into the atmosphere of the earth and breaking up and all over the earth. And it will set forest fires. And then in verse 8, when the second angel sounded, there is no doubt that the friction of planet Earth will set on fire a huge asteroid that will come through the atmosphere of the earth, and it will land in the ocean, and a third of all marine life are going to die and wash upon the shores. But just like it said back in Luke 21, verse 25 and 26, the ocean roaring, and this will cause the oceans to roar. This is one of the causes. Then verse 10, when the third angel sounded, another asteroid came through the atmosphere of planet Earth that normally will block off or burn up such things before they hit the earth. And it'll hit on a land surface and turn a third of the water from freshness to bitterness. And many people will die. And then verse 12 tells of the effects of all of this. When the sun is blocked from its natural view, then the moon is also blocked and the stars. And a third of the earth is going to see darkness because of the soot and the ash blowing up into the atmosphere and circulating in the jet streams. So how are these things going to happen, and what is just one possibility? I'd like to digress now for a moment before I begin to answer these questions. What if the federal government of the United States warned foreign governments not to interfere with an internal crisis that they were expecting at any time? And at the same time, troop movements began. Russian intelligence analysis began to warn on August 25th, 2005, 4 days before Katrina hit New Orleans, that the military leaders of the United States of America had communicated to many of the people around the world, the leaders in other countries, that a crisis was about to happen in America, and that they were not to intervene in the internal affairs of the United States if this crisis did come. How did they know there was going to be a crisis? Why did they warn these other nations not to intervene? It happened. In this Russian report, it said that there were unprecedented things that are about to happen on planet Earth that's threatening the United States and really the entirety of the world. One of them was that they've been advertising impending flu pandemics to encircle the globe and kill possibly 1 billion people. What if 5 confirmed cases in New Orleans of typhoid, has already been, and cholera had already been, it was confirmed by the medical profession? And what if some of the people are shipped to other parts of the country? What if E. coli was found in the water down there and people became contaminated and shipped to all parts of the United States of America? Would we have some kind of pandemic? Possibly. Then they also face accelerated global weather changes, according to this Russian report, and that it will destroy up to 20% of the food crops in the Western nations in the year 2005. It has happened. It also said in that report that the skyrocketing cost of oil threatens the stability of the world's financial markets. It is. And then a fourth thing they mentioned was the impending crackdown on American citizens and imposition of martial law. Remember, this was 4 days before Katrina hit next to New Orleans. And then a fifth thing they mentioned that would threaten the United States and the rest of the world was that there was growing stability in the very core of the earth. How could that be? The very core of the earth that has been unprecedented and never seen on such a scale in modern times. Do they know something that we haven't been told? Could it be that the world is about to experience everything in the apocalyptic writing of the book of Revelation? Before the July 7th attacks in London, the British had announced that their computer systems were under attack. After London's attacks in their subway system, the Washington Post news service reported that the United States Defense Department and other United States agencies were successfully breached by communist countries. These hackers were from communist China. They wanted to disrupt our command and control centers of a newly organized part of our military that was in North Carolina, NORTHCOM. The significance of these exercises that took place in North Carolina, called Orbit Comet, shows that the military structure of the United States has now merged with the police departments of the United States under something called NORTHCOM, which is a military division composed of mostly foreign soldiers. Now, one of the reasons why this is so important is the article that came out, quote, United States positions tens of thousands of foreign troops throughout America, cancels all military leaves and ousts another top general. That was the title of that article. What did it mean they were ousting top generals? Why? Because there was something that they knew was being planned that would affect the freedom of all Americans, and they objected to it, so they were ousted. They were moved out of their positions into retirement. And the article went on to show that there was a recruitment of massive numbers of foreign mercenaries into the United States Air Force, Navy, all the military. They went on to show in this particular article that there were 12,000 in the United States Air Force, or 16,000, I'm sorry. Another 12,000 served in reserve components throughout the United States. And the Marine Corps had 6,000 foreign mercenaries now in their military. The Army, 5,000. The Air Force, about 3,000. And the article ended. And then, if you want to get technical, nobody wanted to say the words out loud or in writing in any of these articles, the awful words, martial law. And yet, did we see it after Katrina hit? Martial law was called for, a state of emergency. We'll get to that in a moment. A Washington Post article on August 8, 2005 by Bradley Graham, under the headline, War Plans Drafted to Counter Terror Attacks in United States. Domestic effort is big shift for military. It went on to say that the United States military has devised for the first time ever plans for guarding against and responding to terrorist attacks in the United States and the use of military inside the borders of the United States in spite of the Posse Comitatus Act, that the military can never be used on private citizens in America. Why is all this happening? They said some of it may be low end, meaning that the scenario would be just crowd control. But on the high end, if there was a disaster, then it would be martial law. And when martial law takes over, it suspends the Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights. Not a very pleasant thought for those who have died for freedom from the time of the birth of this nation and fought in wars all over the world to preserve its freedom. But if you translate this particular article into common English, it says very clearly that if anything happens internally in the United States, such as atomic bombs that are set off, a dirty bomb in a large city or several cities, chemical or biological attacks, or maybe another government scare like the anthrax attack, then the whole country would be in a national state of martial law. And he said it would be up to our eyeballs. That means all freedom would be suspended. That means all guns would be confiscated. Exactly what they're doing in New Orleans, Louisiana right now. So the precedent has been set to detain private citizens who have been charged with nothing in America under the Homeland Security law. There are citizens who have been imprisoned with no charges against them, no trial. All they're doing is sitting and rotting away in jail because they were under suspicion. Yet they were born in America, Americans with official American citizenship. It's totally unconstitutional. Could other people in America be the next ones? Be the next target? Right here in America, new prison camps are being built, but they're being built for supposedly internal attacks upon America and those that they capture. Today in America, our military leaders keep imprisoned American citizens with no charges. What'll happen next? But since they control the media, they're not going to tell us everything that's going on in America. Today, our military forces patrol with tens of thousands of foreign troops in the military under NORTHCOM. Have we been told those things? No, we're told that NORTHCOM came under Homeland Security. Yes, the United States is under attack and doesn't even know it. It's a tragedy what is and will happen to the United States of America. Because when there is no America, the world will be left in a very tragic state. There will be no leadership, not with morals anymore, and it will be all the third world countries, international communism, the types that will destroy anyone that stands in their way. This was only introduction into the sermon today. In the 1980s, about 86 to 88, somewhere in there, I published a magazine concerning a man by the name of Nicola Tesla and his patents, over 900 of them, that he had patented in the United States Patent Office, where he said that he could cause earthquakes by his inventions. He could control the weather. He could steer tornadoes and hurricanes toward the path that he wanted them to go for his own purposes. 900 patents telling how to do all this, control the weather. And those items that I let out the message with, all of them have to do with planet Earth, weather, the atmosphere, repelling those objects that would normally come into the atmosphere and destroy planet Earth. So how in the world are all these prophecies going to happen? When this man Tesla died, all of his patents were placed in the library in Belgrade, Yugoslavia. The Russians took that country for international communism, and suddenly the patents disappeared from that museum. Both the United States and Russia began to experiment with weather control. And that weather control could eventually lead to weather war. That sounds strange. Weather war. But they discovered that Tesla had found extremely low frequency magnetic waves could be used. These are invisible. They can be detected if you have the proper type of electronic equipment. But it could turn the paths of hurricanes 90 degrees and guide them and steer them right where you wanted them to go to create the most destruction possible. They could be caused to intensify as they headed toward the object of destruction. It could be used to devastate a nation, the coastal lines of a nation. And no nation would be blamed for it. It would be called an act of God. Just a horrible thing that happened to that area of the coast. Could these statements be true? They're definitely true. We actually printed at that time the patent numbers of some of these items that were filed by Tesla. Why would Jesus Christ inspire Revelation chapter 11, verse 18, that says when he comes, he will destroy the earth? Why would he do that if it was not possible? Somebody must have the capability before Jesus comes to literally destroy magnetic earth, electric earth. And Jesus Christ is going to destroy those individuals that come. God showed before the flood of Noah's day that whatever man put into his thoughts, he would be able to achieve. Weather control is something that Tesla conceived in his mind. He didn't use it for evil. He only wanted it for good for mankind, to give everybody free energy. He made Thomas Edison, that we're so familiar with in this country, look like a child in a classroom somewhere. When it came to the field of electricity and electromagnetic waves. But a very horrible tragedy happened on August 29th, just 4 days after reports that had went out from the administration in Washington not to intervene in case there was some type of internal crisis in America. And so this happened on August 29th, 2005, when a hurricane, Katrina, blasted the Mississippi coastline right next to New Orleans, Louisiana. It crossed Florida as a simple Category 1 hurricane, did no damage, blew over a few trees. It moved westward and turned toward the southern coastline of the United States. Soon the weather forecasters began to say that it had picked up steam and it became a Category 3 hurricane. Suddenly it became so intense that it was classified as a number 5 hurricane and possibly the worst in human history that they knew of. It slammed into Mississippi near New Orleans, Louisiana. Just following striking that land area, there was a 45-foot tidal wave surge, just like the tsunami that happened over in the Indian Ocean, Sumatra, that leveled 11 or 12 countries, at least the coastlines. Louisiana State University professor Van Herden, who was a hurricane expert, was approached a full year before Hurricane Katrina did her damage. He was asked by our FBI, Homeland Security, and other alphabetical government agencies to work up a scenario. What would happen if a number 5 hurricane blasted its way into New Orleans, Louisiana? FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency that is supposed to be prepared to give aid in emergencies, any kind of aid, in any kind of emergency, was part of those agencies asking Professor Van Herden for a likely devastation report. FEMA knew in advance the devastation was coming. They did nothing. They delayed. They dragged their feet. Said ships with supplies would take 4 or 5 days to get there when they could airlift things in Iraq overnight. When they could take supplies into other parts of the world in a 24-hour notice. But they couldn't go into New Orleans, Louisiana. I wonder why. Could it be a trial run for something that I'm about to talk about? It's as if they knew the tragedy was coming, and Professor Van Herden is a very angry man at this time because he gave them a 1-year advance notice of the devastation. And he said that the devastation that he put in his report is identical to what is happening down there now in New Orleans, Louisiana, and the Mississippi and Alabama coastline. And yet our government did nothing when they saw the number 5 hurricane coming toward the coastline. And they had 3 days to prepare and to have things in the proper position to help those survivors. An FBI agent was interviewed by MSNBC. Rita Cosby was the interviewer for MSNBC and asked why they were there. Why would the FBI be there? He wouldn't give her a straight answer. He kept looking away, changing the subject, diverting the attention of those who were listening. He simply said that if he told her why the FBI was in the area, it would endanger the entire southern coastline. Why would that happen? What did he mean? What could endanger the entire southern coastline just for the knowledge that he had in his head? He didn't explain and wouldn't explain. What does he know that the American people are not to know? Is weather war really being waged against America? Tesla said he could do it. He used to walk around New York City with a little gadget in his pocket, and he would mash it and buildings would sway back and forth. This is fact. And when he stopped and turned the gadget off, the building stood erect, stable. It's called resonance. When he got his machine in proper resonance with the building, then it would sway. Did this seeming weather tragedy occur by accident, or was it deliberately guided and increased in intensity on purpose? These are questions that the news media should be asking. If they had done their homework and knew about Tesla from 1900, they would know the answer to all these questions. Why would it take the 4 or 5 days for ships with water, food, supplies, and so on to be sent by FEMA into the area when they knew a full year in advance? Because they had been there, they received the study from the LSU professor. They knew the storm was coming at least 3 days ahead of time. We knew it. We saw it. All you had to do was watch the Weather Channel. It was no secret. Were they told to slow down the proceedings to create as much misery and death as possible? It's just a question. And the reason I ask that question is anybody that has ever studied the Illuminati knows that their ultimate goal is to create order out of chaos. President George Bush said at least 2 occasions that out of all this chaos, order would come. And then another gentleman high in government said the same thing. Could they also know something we don't know? President Bush went to Louisiana to look over the devastation. But then, without telling the governor of Louisiana, he planned to fly down a second time, and he did. The governor of Louisiana was heading over to Houston, Texas to make sure everything was going well and housing the people in the Astrodome. But when she got word that President Bush was coming, she canceled her trip. President Bush asked her to let him federalize the Louisiana National Guard and surrender state sovereignty. Could this be the plan? Surrender states' rights to a centralized federal government in Washington, D.C.? The governor of Louisiana turned down the request by President Bush and retained their state sovereignty. But what I would like you to understand now is executive orders that had been laid down since the 1960s, latter 60s, and 70s. We had a taped interview of Representative Henry Gonzalez from down around San Antonio. He's now deceased. He was asked if the federal government ever wanted to declare martial law, could they do it legally? He said, oh yes, all the laws are on the books. They could declare a dictatorship overnight in America if the circumstances arose that gave them the opportunity. Here is one of those opportunities that is on paper that has been lying there and waiting. It's called Executive Order number 11,004. An executive order is something that is written by a president of the United States. It originated and was only to tell the cooks and so on in the household of the president what to do. But then they began to expand it to create laws. And here's what Executive Order 11,004 says. Federal seizure of all housing and finances and authority to establish forced relocation. Has anybody been forced to relocate? People who wanted to stay in their homes in New Orleans and the devastated area, they said they wanted to stay there, but now they're being forced to relocate. Some said that they would go out if they were in a body bag. Otherwise, they would stay in their home and confront anyone, even the military. Executive Order number 11,051. It provides the Federal Emergency Management Agency complete authorization to put the above orders into effect in times of increased national crisis. Why is FEMA there? They have, under Executive Order 11,051, the right to be there. They can declare martial law, which has been done. They're actually confiscating guns because under martial law you cannot have a gun. There was a hurricane years ago called Andrew. It focused attention on the FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency. It was accused of not doing its job as efficiently in Florida by the media and by Congress. An investigation caused FEMA to have very bad light in the eyes of the American people. It turned up some facts that they didn't want anyone to know. Why did FEMA really exist? Were they an emergency outfit? It found that they spent 12 times more money for black undercover operations than for disaster relief. It spent $1.3 billion building secret bunkers throughout the United States in anticipation of government disruption by foreign or domestic upheaval. Yet fewer than 20 members of Congress knew that the $1.3 billion in spending for natural disaster situations even existed. And they did not spend it on the natural disasters. But there is another executive order, number 11,921, that allows the Federal Emergency Preparedness Agency to develop plans to establish control over the mechanisms of production and distribution of energy sources, wages, salaries, credit, and the flow of money in the United States financial institutions in any unidentified national emergency. Was Katrina a national emergency? They declared martial law. It must have been a national emergency. It must have been a crisis. It also provides that when a state of emergency is declared by the President, that Congress cannot review the actions for 6 months. Here's a newspaper article. Bush's advisors debate seizing Louisiana effort. And it tells about how the President of the United States and all of his advisors sat down and talked about going to the governor, taking over everything in the state of Louisiana, suspending states' rights. And after the governor refused, they decided they would rescind their effort and not enforce it. Because if they did, the American people would rise up. What if you had been told, which we have been told by President Bush, that 20 tanker ships are headed for America? They're bringing crude oil. Some of it's already refined, some of it is not and must be refined. The question is, are these ships American or are they foreign? Do they really have oil or do they not? The American people need to know. If they're foreign ships, what is the cargo? Is it really the oil, or are they bringing in something that would be detrimental to the people of the United States of America? Has the number 5 category hurricane been used to orchestrate a far different agenda than we've been told? Is there real weather war? And did the results expected come true? We'll have to wait and see as time goes on. But Hurricane Katrina had every signature of manipulation by weather control. But the key is, if we wait and see and not question all of our alphabet government agencies, could it be too late for America to remain free if they were to orchestrate several of these? What if they were to orchestrate an earthquake and we see San Francisco and San Francisco Bay and Los Angeles lopped off into the ocean? Would it be a little too late for those people? Weather war, the use of extremely low frequency magnetic waves, is it a fact? Yes, it is. One thing is for sure, those who have taken the time to prove who are the world actors working for a one world government know that the United States of America is the last target. Could this catastrophe also be a reason for bringing in foreign troops to help? Anybody that watched CNN knew that Mexican troops came into the United States. They were armed. Were they bringing supplies? We will wait and see. Bless their heart if they do. The summer of 1998 was the second hottest in Texas history. 100-plus temperatures plagued Texas, all of Texans who were living within a 100-mile radius of Dallas, Texas. The type of heat had not been experienced in Dallas since 1980, when it was topped out at many, many days of 100-plus temperatures at that time. There were several weather forecasters who stated that a high ridge had settled directly over Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas area, and that for some unknown reason it stalled and nothing, not even the jet stream, could push it along. No other weather system could penetrate it. It couldn't push it on to the east because normally all patterns of weather goes from the west to the east across America. I can remember as I was a young person growing up, you could always count on it. West to east, jet streams. Nice rain just about every few days because of the moisture picked up out of the Gulf of Mexico as the jet stream came across. No longer is it that way. In 2005 in Minneapolis, Minnesota, today that I'm speaking, it's 18 degrees above normal. Chicago, the same way. And yet they're nearly that low in temperatures below normal. In Seattle, Montana, because the jet stream is going across and then taking a dive all the way up into Canada and bringing the hot air all the way up to the Canadian border. When used to it, never did such a thing. Storms would come from Mexico into Arizona, then into New Mexico, and head directly toward Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas. But those storms would suddenly take an abrupt turn either to the north and deposit all the rain up into Oklahoma, or they would turn south and drench San Antonio, Texas. That was in 1998. In 1993, the year of the Great Flood on the Mississippi River, we moved here from St. Louis. That year, the temperatures were 103 and 105 degrees day after day after day. Because of the same reason, the jet stream would all of a sudden take a northerly trip, and the heat would come up from Mexico all the way up to the Canadian border. and extreme heat was everywhere. But in 1998, weather forecasters plainly said that they didn't have a clue as to why these unusual patterns existed. And for the first time, they began to give a reason. They blamed everything on what is called El Nino out in the Pacific Ocean. If they couldn't explain it, it was El Nino. Could it be that governments have latched on to these discoveries of Tesla, and then they began to use them for their diabolical purposes? Around the turn of the century, Tesla filed over 900 patents pertaining to all of this electrical energy, magnetic energy, extremely low frequency magnetic waves. He even described the results of them in all of these patents. And when Russia got hold of the papers, all of a sudden America's weather began to change within a few years. It took them about 10 to 12 years after they took them in 1945. They began to experiment. Then they began to bring the United States of America into it also. Jesus Christ said very plainly that he would return at the seventh trump. Notice what it says in Revelation 11, verse 15, then verse 18. And the seventh angel sounded. That's the last trump. And there were great voices in heaven saying, the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. And the nations were angry, and your wrath is come. That's Revelation 15. It'll be poured out on the world after the true saints are caught up to meet Christ. And the time of the dead, that they should be judged, and that you should give reward unto your servants, the prophets, and to the saints, and them that fear your name, small and great. And look at the last sentence. And should destroy them that destroy the earth. Someone knows something and is destroying planet Earth. But what does it mean, destroy the earth? In the summer of 1993, the greatest flood in recorded history stalked the Midwest. Des Moines, Iowa was underwater. The Mississippi River crested at the arch in front of St. Louis, Missouri at 51 feet, which is tremendously high. According to a 14-page supplement to an Sunday, August edition of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, I quote, the reason for the flood was that the jet stream. Well, the jet stream. Somebody's got to blame somebody. They went on to show that during that rainy period, normally there would be 170,000 cubic feet of water passing in front of the arch per second. During this flood, when it came to the greatest part of it, there was over 1 million cubic feet per second going past the arch, which is over 6 times the normal water weight. That's called a flood. And the head of the Army Corps of Engineers stated on C-SPAN satellite television on July 9th, 1993, that they were watching closely the New Madrid fault line in case the heavy water weight were to set off an earthquake. They predicted if it set off an earthquake, it would be 20 miles wide, the Mississippi, and 2 miles deep. Places like St. Louis, Memphis, Tennessee, Vicksburg, Mississippi would no longer exist. They would be a mile or two underwater. This was his prediction. People got a real scare on August 28th that year, 1993, when an earthquake hit. It wasn't very big, but it was 3.3 on the Richter scale. Do you realize in the year 2005 there has been thousands of tremors along the Mississippi Basin? Arkansas, Missouri, all of them along the New Madrid fault line. Unprecedented. Never had they experienced that many in 1 year. Will a major quake eventually come that will split the United States in half? extremely low frequency magnetic waves that was discovered by Tesla. Patent by Tesla described how that they could send these extremely low frequency magnetic waves down to the core of the earth, and they could create earthquakes. And according to the amount of wattage, voltage that they send down to the core of the earth, determine the severity of the earthquake. The whole planet could be changed. Continents could be disrupted, split in half, become islands, all because of what Tesla discovered. Starting in the winter of 1977 and 1978, Arctic blizzards with heavy snowfalls just came down from the north, covered all the northern states, right on down into St. Louis, Missouri, where at that time I lived. The Rocky Mountain states, which needs a lot of snowpack and the runoff and the melting so that they can feed their summer crops, especially wheats in the plains of Kansas, Nebraska, the Dakotas, and so on, Oklahoma, Texas, Wyoming, and Colorado. Moisture was minimal that year. All the moisture, all the snow had dumped in St. Louis, 22 inches, and quick froze. And it stayed that way on the ground for 61 straight days. Unheard of. The most that had ever stayed without melting was 10 before. And the high temperature in that year, in the month of January, was 10 degrees above zero. The high temperature. Unheard of. Weather war had begun. It cost billions of dollars to the Americans. While all this was happening, the West parched. They burned up. The East froze. Because the weather didn't come down across the Pacific warm water as normally, Pacific Ocean, but it came down from the frigid Canadian area, the Arctic Circle, where the temperatures are very, very cold. Then came the summer of 1980, when temperatures were the hottest ever recorded in many parts of the country. The Washington Post actually reported on February 2nd, 1981, that a single weather pattern had gripped virtually the entirety of the United States, causing a coast-to-coast drought unique in the annals of weather reporting. End of quote. The winter of 1980, 1981 brought blizzards, freezing cold in the northern part of the United States. And during the winter of 1982 and 1983, snowstorms shut down cities in the Mideast, while winter storms left $500 million in damage in California alone. Spring storms in 1983 in Mississippi and Louisiana forced 52,000 people from their homes. There was an estimated damage of $626 million. During that same year of 1982 and 1983, as the summer rolled around, more than 500 tornadoes ripped across Texas, one state, killing 22 people. They recorded record snowpacks on the Sierra Nevadas and the Rockies, the mountain ranges that produced devastating mudslides and flooding that was unprecedented since weather keeping had begun. The weather war was on. It was the wettest spring on record in much of the nation, all the way from the deep south, all the way up to Chicago and across to New England, until the year 1993 came with a great flood in the middle part of the United States. This was followed by the summer of 1983, which, according to meteorologists, ranks among one of the 10 hottest and driest in much of the Midwest, the Southeast, since the government had been keeping records in the 19th century. As a direct result of all this, farmers lost billions of dollars. It was hot in Georgia, In 1 week alone in the state of Georgia, temperatures killed 350,000 broilers, chickens, and 14,000 breeder hens. 1 week alone. Kansas City, Missouri had temperatures which topped 90 degrees, which is unusual, on 47 days and topped over 100 on 18 days. It went all the way up to Pierre, South Dakota, where temperatures above 100 were 11. 11 days of over 100 that far north, unheard of at that time. And then of August 31st, 1983, the heat wave had killed more than 220 people, many of them elderly, in Chicago, Illinois, and other places, the large cities where they didn't have air conditioning. Were these just acts of God? Were they accidents? Did they just normally happen? Or has man interfered with nature to bring them about? Is man waging weather war against the United States of America? If so, how is he doing it and by whom? And can we prove it? The motto is, prove all things and hold fast to that which is good. The Bible says someone would be destroying the earth and Jesus Christ would return to destroy them for their unproductive activities. But there were early warnings that all this was going to take place. In 1974, Professor Gordon J.F. McDonnell of Dartmouth College testified before a Senate subcommittee on the subject of weather modification. McDonnell served as an associate director of the Institute of Geophysical and Planetary Physics at the University of California at Los Angeles, better known as UCLA. During his testimony in this subcommittee on Un-American Activities, Professor McDonnell outlined possible weather warfare methods, including the ability to steer hurricanes, manipulate the polar ice caps, create guided tidal waves, and modify earthquakes. The testimony came. It was before the Senate, their subcommittee. That was way back in 1974. According to McDonnell, and I'll quote, as economic competition among many advanced nations heightens, it may be to a country's advantage to ensure a peaceful natural environment for itself and a disturbed environment for its competitors. Operations producing such conditions might be carried out covertly, that's in secret. Since nature's great irregularities permit storms, floods, droughts, earthquakes, and tidal waves to be viewed as unusual but not unexpected. Such a secret war never need to be declared or even known by the affected population. The years of drought and storm could be attributed to unkind nature. And only after a nation was thoroughly drained would an armed enemy take over, be attempted. End of quote. They knew in 1974 that weather war was coming. They knew that it would just devastate a country. It could bring a nation to its knees. And when you read Deuteronomy 28, Leviticus 26, it begins to make sense at some of the simple statements there. When you understand that there are those who are destroying the earth. They have discovered the use of the extremely low frequency magnetic waves, the magnetism and the electricity of the earth, and how to use radio waves against mankind. Since Professor McDonnell testified back there in 1974, there have been tremendous advances that have been made in the field of computer technology. But even then, McDonnell was looking ahead to the future when he testified before that Senate subcommittee, quote, "The advent of high-speed computers enables atmospheric models to be studied in greater detail. These computers have a peculiar importance to weather modification, since they'll enable scientists to carry out extended experiments to test whether or not various schemes for manipulating the atmosphere are indeed possible and what the outcome should be." End of quote. He told them in 1974. On November 14th, 1977, the Vancouver, Canada Province newspaper reported that a Dr. Andrew Makrowski had proof that the former Soviet Union had been playing havoc with Canadian and United States weather. Remember, that was 1977. The newspaper reported that Makrowski's proof of Soviet weather warfare attacks against North America is, quote, supported by top scientists, end of quote, and that they had been brought to the attention of the Canadian Prime Minister. In the fall of 1976, the former Soviets, I call them former, they're still the same. You can't change the spots of a leopard. Whatever you are, that's what you are. And the Soviets have always wanted to take the world. They just changed names to fool the innocents. But in the fall of 1976, Russia began sending out the most powerful man-made radio beams ever created. So vast was the magnitude of the Soviet transmissions that they jammed various radio frequencies all over the world. You couldn't hear shortwave for hours at a time. They're doing it again in America. They're blocking frequencies of shortwave so that you can't hear, sometimes up to an hour or an hour and a half at a time. Dr. Makrowski's reported that the Soviets' transmission, and I'm quoting, is something in the region of 40 million kilowatts generating capacity, end of quote. He went on to say, and I quote again, "To understand how powerful that is, you only have to realize that the most powerful transmitters the Americans have ever even planned, not built, was for only 2 million kilowatts, end of quote. The highest, most powerful radio station in America operates at 50,000 watts. You divide that into 40 million, and you have a tremendous advantage. Nicola Tesla, who lived from 1856 to 1943, was born in Croatia. That was then Austria-Hungary. He immigrated to the United States in 1884. He worked for a short time with Thomas Edison and became a naturalized American citizen. He was a pioneer in high-tension electricity. He made discoveries and inventions of great value to the development of radio transmissions and in the field of electricity. He invented the alternating current, AC, system by which electricity can be transported through wires for thousands and thousands of miles. Then the electricity can be sent into industrial plants to operate the machinery to bring about what we have today. It can go into the homes to give us heat, light, energy. He laid the groundwork for the development of wireless telegraphs and radio communications, and transmitted electricity without wires for up to 25 miles, and they lit lamps. Wireless electricity. As a result of all of his accomplishments, Tesla received 14 doctorates from universities all over the world. And he patented over 900 new processes in the field of energy conversion. Tesla also wrote of a method whereby weather could be controlled so that deserts could become farmlands, and where cold could be modified and heat could be tempered so that it wouldn't be so hot. And with this in mind now, there was a weather expert by the name of Lowell Ponty. He wrote an article called The Killer Electric. It appeared in the August 1978 Gallery magazine. According to Ponty, and I quote, shortly after the turn of the century, Tesla theorized that by using coordinated radio impulses, it should be possible to manipulate the part of the Earth's atmosphere or magnetic field that resides at the edge of space up to the ionosphere by generating giant standing waves. Now, these are invisible. Giant standing waves of electricity. These waves, said Tesla, could then be manipulated to change the course of giant wind patterns, better known as the jet stream, that shape our weather. End of quote. So anytime all of a sudden storms go in one direction and the weatherman says there is something stalled here, and it doesn't allow the weather, the jet stream and the rain to penetrate it, and it goes to the north or to the south, you know what it is. They have created giant standing radio waves from the ionosphere as far up in space as you can go without being in outer space, all the way down to the core of the earth. The jet stream cannot penetrate it. And so they can actually bring drought in one area and bake people and destroy the economy. Or they can create rain for days and days and days like they did in 1993 and created the giant Mississippi River flood. A man by the name of C.B. Baker, who at one time put out a newsletter called Youth Action News, wrote back in July of 1982, quote, around 1900, Tesla invented and patented a system of utilizing the Earth's natural vibrations to transmit power through the Earth without wires. Tesla's system involved the use of extremely low frequency electromagnetic cycles per second. Tesla proved that it was possible to create gigantic standing electromagnetic waves, sometimes thousands of miles long, which can be used to modify the weather and create man-made droughts, man-made floods, and man-made storms. Tesla's giant standing electromagnetic waves can also create long-lasting high-pressure areas, end of quote. Therefore, the hot summers in the 1980s, in 1982, that killed 220 people. A man by the name of Bill Boshears of the Cincinnati Enquirer wrote on November 9th, 1978, in the Cincinnati Enquirer newspaper about Tesla, his theories. Then he added this, quote, at Tesla's death in 1943, some of his papers went to a museum in Belgrade, Yugoslavia. But apparently some found their way to Russia. If indeed the Russians have succeeded in uncovering some of Tesla's lost secrets, the disarmament committees may be in for some real earth-shaking proposals. End of quote. In other words, why sit down and talk about disarming the nuclear bomb when they could send giant standing waves and scorch people? They could bring floods, they could steer hurricanes and tornadoes and wipe out whole cities. Because they would use the weather, and you could not have a declared war. You could not prove they were doing it. You could only take what Tesla said and then see that it was applied and happening. And therefore, that's the only proof you would have. But how do the Soviets, former Soviets, better known as Russia today, control our weather? On May 27th, 1983, a man by the name of Don Bell put out his report called Don Bell Report. He contained detailed information as to how the former Soviet Union, today Russia, is operating to manipulate the weather of the United States of America. According to that report, quote, Tesla's secrets proved of great interest to the Soviet Union, whose engineers began developing and perfecting the theories that Tesla had blueprinted, combining secrets gained from Tesla and technological materials and equipment obtained from the United States. The Soviets have constructed giant transmitting stations capable of producing 40 million megawatts, or 40 million watts. The highest radio transmission in the United States for commercial broadcasting is 50,000 watts. The Voice of America uses 100,000 watts in some of its broadcasts. But this is hardly comparable to the 40 million watts used by these Soviet transmitters to project their scalar waves. Another part of Tesla's secrets is the use of extremely low frequency, from 7.5 to 15 hertz in most cases. Frequency very similar to those used by the human brain. Wonder why we have so many people that go berserk in America today? The human brain. You wonder why you don't feel well some days and you just can't think? Because they're transmitting their extremely low frequency magnetic waves, and it affects the operation of a human brain. Perhaps the most important secret of the Tesla broadcasts is the fact that the waves are not projected into the air like ordinary radio waves, but are sent into the ground. Now, what does this mean? Sent into the ground, it affects the core of the earth. These electromagnetic waves are said to be able to penetrate and pass through anything, including the very center of the planet. And in a sense, that would be difficult to visualize. The earth itself becomes a kind of receiving set. So these waves can form what Tesla called standing walls. Headquartered in Ottawa, Canada, and having some support from the Canadian government, is an organization called the Planetary Association for Clean Energy. It's abbreviated as PACE. It's headed by a Dr. Andrew Makrowski. PACE has been observing Soviet attempts to control weather since 1977. And you can look up Dr. Makrowski, as I did, right on the internet. PACE explains that by creating an extremely low frequency magnetic field whose wavelengths are equivalent to that of the terrestrial diameter, all of the scientific stuff, we don't understand it necessarily, but it makes a point. There are developed what are called standing waves. You and I can't see them, but they're standing there from the core of the earth up into the ionosphere so that nothing, the jet stream, storms cannot penetrate them. They're diverted. They can target a city, as they did one city in Kansas one year, and the temperatures went up in 1 hour 20 degrees. If these waves were visible, they would resemble gigantic oval bubbles lying on the Earth's surface. Part of the bubble would penetrate deep into the Earth, perhaps to the very center of the planet. The upper part of the bubble would extend upward into the ionosphere, perhaps even higher. The result, the jet streams are diverted. Radio signals in certain Hertz cycles are interfered with. In his previously mentioned article in Galaxy magazine, weather war expert Lowell Ponty reported that in October of 1976, the Soviets, and I quote, began tampering with the Earth's magnetic field, end of quote. Ponty went on to say, quote, from a configuration of 4 incredible high-powered transmitters, 3 of them in a gigantic triangle, with points in cities northwest of Moscow. So they were standing northwest of Moscow. The Soviets began to send out coordinated radio pulses. The signals disrupted shortwave radio broadcasts and gigantic wave bands throughout the world. So even amateur operators could not operate because of these transmissions. He went on to show that in 1976, in December of that year, the Soviets launched 3 new satellites to coordinate the signals from their ground-based transmitters. The impulses that followed were a classic experiment based upon the frequency wavelength of Tesla's theories. So they knew in Canada and scientists in the United States that it was the Russians, and it was weather war against America. That's why Nikita Khrushchev stated in 1960 that they had weapons on the board, that when they were finalized, they could get rid of 1/3 of their military because they wouldn't need them to defeat America. Dr. Mikrowski and a group of scientists monitored the Soviet extremely low frequency transmissions from various stations all over Canada, and then published in detail what they found, the dates and everything of the transmissions. There was no doubt whatsoever that it corresponded with the disrupted weather patterns, disrupted radio communications. So he sent out a letter in February 1978 and said, quote, in the case of the winter of 1976-77, the Soviets have managed to establish terrestrial electric resonance, and then to learn how to establish relatively stable and localized, remember, localized, extremely low frequency magnetic fields, which were able to hamper or divert the jet stream flow in the northern hemisphere, end of quote. And isn't it interesting that out of the last 7 or 8 major earthquakes, that extremely low frequency magnetic waves were detected 3 days in advance of the earthquakes? That tells you there is a deliberate attack upon America. And just like the Bible said, when Jesus Christ comes, He will destroy those that are destroying the earth. Maybe He will speed the day that He will return, cut the days short because of all that is happening in the world today. There was an article in the Washington Post on February 2nd, 1981, and it described the jet stream as just a bundle of powerful steering currents that was about 300 miles an hour, and they traveled about 30,000 feet above the earth. The article went on and said, and I quote, normally the jet stream would wander straight through the middle of the country from west to east, pushing storms into a position where they could pick up moisture from the Gulf of Mexico, and as they spin clockwise, deposit it on the Mideast and East. When the jet stream alters course, the meteorological results are dramatic. In 1977, it skipped up and crossed Canada instead of the United States, dropping down south only when it reached the Great Lakes. This left the West in extreme dryness, while the Mideast and East, or Midwest and East, experienced severe Arctic cold mixed with snow created when the icy air met the moisture moving from the south to the Gulf of Mexico. That was the year when it all began in earnest, 1977, when St. Louis, Missouri, high temperature in January, 10 degrees. Snow 22 inches fell and instantly froze and stayed on the ground for 61 days. So the devastating heat waves that have been experienced and the cold cycles in the United States have all been a direct result of weather warfare by the Soviet Union, former Soviet, called Russia today, by their extremely low frequency magnetic waves and their giant standing waves that divert the jet stream. In late January of 1982, Dr. Mikrowski reported that the former Soviet Union's extremely low frequency signal had changed its pulse from 10 hertz to 31.5 hertz. And as a direct result, it would cause giant standing wave troughs in the Rocky Mountains from Edmonton, Canada to New Mexico. Then he went on and showed that because of this, it created troughs all the way from Ottawa, Canada, down to Atlanta, Georgia, and created havoc with the weather. And that's why there were so many chickens, hens, and broiler hens that were destroyed in 1 week in Georgia in the summer of 1982. So is there war going on in the world today? Yes, there's hot wars. But there's also wars that are undeclared, undetected, that are called natural disasters. But when you understand what is really happening, then you begin to understand why Jesus said it would have to destroy those that are destroying the earth. Because if left to themselves, they would totally break down the ionosphere. They would so disrupt the core of the earth internally that earthquakes, volcanoes, that the earth would literally go out of its orbit, that all the apocryphal talks in the Bible and the scriptures would come into fore. The earth would go out of its orbit. Earthquakes would continue all over the world, some of them so dramatic that it would split continents in half, as that has been predicted for the Mississippi River, the New Madrid fault line. So the weather control has been in America. The weather wars has been fought against America now for a long time. But there is something else that the American people do not understand that's going on. And that is, not only Russia is involved in weather control and weather war, but do you remember how the United States and Russia are jointly working on the space program? And yet each are working separately, competing against each other? The same thing is happening with weather war. The United States of America is also involved, our government. We're working with the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, in manipulating the weather. But at the same time, we're competing against them to have a strategic advantage. What is called the Eastern liberal establishment in the Northeast, around Boston, Massachusetts, where the Illuminati came here, started working. They're still in control up there. And at the top of the pyramid of this power structure of the Eastern establishment is what is called the invisible government. In other words, people who are placed in positions, appointed positions in our government. The Council on Foreign Relations was originally formed for the purpose of taking control of the American foreign policy. for the benefit of the international banking fraternity which heads up the Illuminati that are striving for a one-world government to fulfill Revelation chapter 13. But its aims have considerably expanded since that time, and its present goal is to set up a one-world government of socialism, the New World Order, Novus Ordo Seclorum, on the back of your $1 bill. It wants to consolidate everything in the world in their hands, from money to minerals to machines, corporations, food production, so that they can control the world. In early 1973, David Rockefeller, in addition to being on the board of directors of the Council on Foreign Relations, created a separate entity called the Trilateral Commission. The very first executive director of the Trilateral Commission was a man known as Zbigniew Brzezinski. Zbigniew Brzezinski just happened to be a Marxist. He wrote a book, Between Two Ages, published in 1970. Now, Zbigniew Brzezinski praised Marxism. He views the United States as obsolete. He yearned for central planning in America's future. He proposed a piecemeal transition of the United States national sovereignty to a community of nations called the United Nations. In an article in September 1977 issue of American Opinion, a man by the name of Alan Stang wrote, and I quote, "For years, the millionaire socialists who conspire to rule us have been building up the Soviet capacity to threaten us. So the incredible question is, are these conspirators of the establishment participating in possible weather war against us?" End of quote. In this connection, whether there are cooperating the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission, we should look at Brzezinski's book, Between Two Ages, because he wrote within the pages of it, and I quote, "Not only have new weapons been developed, but some of these basic concepts of geography and strategy have been fundamentally altered. Space and weather control have replaced Suez and Gibraltar as key elements of strategy." He said weather control. Devastate a nation, devastate your enemy. The Trilateral Commission and Council on Foreign Relations member Zbigniew Brzezinski also stated something else in the pages of his book. Quote, "Technology will make available to the leaders of major nations a variety of techniques for conducting secret warfare, of which only a bare minimum of security forces will be appraised. So there'll be just a small number of people that will even be told there is a secret war going on." I'll continue the quote. "One nation may attack a competitor covertly, secretly. Techniques of weather modification could be employed to produce prolonged periods of drought or storm, thereby weakening a nation's capacity and forcing it to accept the demands of the competitor." End of quote. This just happened to be the head of national security under the Jimmy Carter administration, a Marxist, cooperating with Russia, the enemy of America. Obviously, Brzezinski was aware of Tesla's theories and secrets, and how that it was in the hands of the Soviet Union at that time, Russia today. Shortly after, President Jimmy Carter named Brzezinski as the National Security Advisor, the Trilateral Commission issued an official report entitled, and I quote, "Collaboration with Communist Countries in Managing Global Problems." End of quote. That's the title. This official Trilateral Commission publication listed 9 areas of global concern, 2 of which were areas of weather modification and earthquake control. So this weather war against the people in the United States has come about because certain people in the United States and the former Soviet Union are cooperating. And at the same time, they're competing with each other. Remember, the ultimate aim of the CFR, Council on Foreign Relations, the masterminds of the Trilateral Commission also, is a one world government and a merger of the United States and Russia and all the communist countries of the world. Revelation 13 shows that that is going to happen in verse 1 and 2, verse 4 and verse 7 and 8. There is coming a world government. There has been a collusion between the U.S. and the USSR. In 1974, a summit conference was held in Vladivostok, Russia. This was specifically for one discussion: how to modify the weather. President Gerald Ford and Henry Kissinger of the Council on Foreign Relations, who also was the Secretary of State, represented the United States, while the former Soviet dictator Leonid Brezhnev and other Soviet officials represented Russia. Discussing this particular meeting in Don Bell report of March 23, 1979, it said, and I quote, "Since it was known that Russia was experimenting with weather modification, it was suggested that the two superpowers collaborate, like they had already agreed to collaborate in outer space exercises. The United States and the USSR were supposed to work together, and apparently did so, but in the Soviet Union. That is, Russia supplied the location and the personnel, while the United States supplied the technology and the equipment." End of quote. So the United States, certain businessmen that were members of the Council on Foreign Relations and Trilateral Commission that are working for a one world government, supplied all that was necessary to build the equipment for weather war against America. In accordance with the terms of this Vladivostok agreement, under a federal grant, that is your tax money, $3.5 million was given so that they could build a giant electromagnet that was built in Chicago, Illinois, near there in a plant. It weighed 40 tons. It was capable of generating a magnetic field 250,000 times greater than the Earth generates. And it was the largest and most powerful electromagnetic equipment ever constructed. It was a most useful piece of equipment for any Tesla type operation dealing with weather control. This marvel of an electromagnetic whirl was loaded onto a giant United States Air Force C-5 Galaxy on June 19th, 1977. It was flown to the air base near Moscow, where it was installed. It was put into operation in what was supposedly a joint U.S.-USSR program. Also, the Carter administration arranged for the Soviets to have a giant $13 million computer. And I thought mine at $500 was high. And it was for weather control and weather research. It was known as the Cyber 76. It was manufactured by Controlled Data Corporation of Minneapolis, Minnesota. It was far more powerful and versatile than any computer that could ever be found behind the Iron Curtain. It also had military uses. The December 22nd, 1980 Newsweek magazine carried an article on the deadly economic destruction from the severe heat of the previous summer of 1980. According to Newsweek magazine, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration had actually estimated agricultural losses to be $13 billion to $16 billion. ABC Television Network News on February 24th, 1982, reported on the damages from extreme cold for the month of January alone in 1982. According to a report by the Department of Commerce, extra heating costs nationwide for January 1982 alone was $1.7 billion. Now, what if a hurricane could be steered to wipe out the offshore oil production so that all of a sudden heating oil, gasoline prices would skyrocket? Is that possible, knowing everything that we have learned from this? Agricultural losses in that summer of 1982 was estimated to be $1.7 billion. In Florida, 1/2 of the winter vegetable crop and 1/4 of the citrus crop were killed by the cold weather of that winter. And the cost of snow clearance and damage to bridges and roads was $1.8 billion. Somebody paid taxes to pay for all of that. Property damage totaled $1.5 billion. And in California, mudslides causing damage destroyed 6,000 homes and businesses. In all, it was a $7.8 billion direct loss in the first 4 weeks of 1982 due to weather war against America. During the previous years, the United States had signed numerous deals to ship grain to the Soviet Union. A 5-year agreement was signed on August 25th, 1983. On September 12th, 1983, the United States Department of Agriculture announced that the worst drought in half a century had cut the corn crop by 48%, 112 million tons. Yet the very next day, the Soviet Union purchased 135,000 tons of American corn. The astounding part of all this was the agreement that the United States signed on August 25th. Unlike any agreement that ever made before, did not contain any clause saying if we have drought in America, we cannot ship to you. So we shipped according to the contract and left Americans without the corn crops. We had the shortages that sent the prices through the roof, but they got their corn. And the last thing I'd like to talk about today, in the book Between Two Ages, Zbigniew Brzezinski stated this, quote, "It may be possible and tempting to exploit for strategic political purposes the fruits of research on the brain or human behavior." End of quote. The research of Dr. Makowski of Pace in Canada had previously been discussed regarding the weather war that the Soviets were placing against the United States. In its July 1979 issue, the Pace newsletter, in a special section entitled USSR ELF, meaning extremely low frequencies, said this, quote, "At least 5 USSR installations are operating simultaneously up to 24 hours daily since July of 1976 with an intensity of up to 40 million watts. These emit pulses ranging from 5 to 6 hertz cycles per second." Now, thinking about this low frequency magnetic waves, they went on to say in that newsletter, quote, "Psychophysiological effects include influence on reaction time, timing behavior, ambulatory behavior, oxygen uptake, endocrine changes, cardiovascular functions, and precipitation clotting times of colloids." In other words, it affects the brain and it affects some of the organs of the body. Further characteristics observed by the extremely low frequency monitoring network include hearing impairment, cortisone hormone production, and irritability in human beings, especially older people. End of quote. So it affects the mind. It affects the body. We wonder why America sometimes have accidents on the highways because of their timing, their coordination, hand and eye movement, when obviously before there was no problem. But on certain days when the extremely low frequency magnetic waves are out there, things happen. In 1975, an issue of the Soviet publication International Life discussed electronic mind control development in terms that infer the use of Tesla-style technology can control the mind. The article stated that atmospheric electricity can be used to suppress mental activity in large groups of people. Very interesting. I remember seeing a movie about the future one time, and a guy went forward in a time machine. Everything seemed so wonderful. Everybody was about 30 years of age. And at a certain time, when a certain emission went off, a signal, everybody instantly turned around like a zombie and walked straight into the building. Mind control. The journal went on to say that sonic generators can cause this. Tuned to an infrasound, that is below the hearing level. You and I could not hear it, but it would be out there. And it could create feelings of depression, fear, panic, terror, and despair. This is what's been waged against America. Could it be this is why we have more people with mental problems in America than any other nation in the world? Because since 1976, weather war and war on the brain has been conducted by Russia. There was a detailed study of extremely low frequency magnetic waves effects that appeared in 1977 in a book called Biological Effects of Electric and Magnetic Fields of Extremely Low Frequency. It was written by a Dr. Shepard, PhD, co-authored by a Mr. Eisenbud, and in the science, had a doctorate in science. Here's what they said, quote, "The one firm conclusion that emerges from a review of the existing literature that is relatively weak extreme electric or magnetic waves are capable of evoking neurophysiological or behavioral effects." End of quote. In other words, it just makes you act differently. As they said in the communist newspaper, you will have feelings of depression, fear, panic, terror, despair. Then you add to it Ritalin in the school kids, take them off of it, and some of the side effects are wanting to murder or commit suicide. So they take their guns and they do it. We could go on and on. But Jesus Christ told us to make sure that we are on the right side when the time comes. Because when that seventh trump comes, whether we like to believe it or not, we're going to have our final judgment upon us. The world is not being judged because it is blinded by Satan. But those that are called first fruits in the Bible, those that are first being called to understand, we're being judged by the lives we live. Bible prophecy is a part of a diet that we must live, and especially in the end times, because this is when Bible prophecy is being fulfilled. Sometimes it is not very pleasant to hear. Sometimes if we don't have a firm, sound mind based upon Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit, and we're following the leadership of the Holy Spirit, it can bring fear into our life. But Jesus said, "Fear not. It is my Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." And it is. But before the kingdom comes, there are going to be great and awesome sights, fearful events that are going to come upon planet Earth. And the only people that should have an absolute calmness about them are the true saints of the living God. Because number one, He said, if you follow me and obey my commandments, I will account you worthy to escape all of these things that are going to happen. And number two, He has even told us that there is a place where He will see to it we can escape to. How we will get to that place, I don't know. Whether you'll be able to drive a car, fly a plane, ride a bicycle, in some cases a tricycle, or whether all of a sudden, just like Philip and the eunuch, all of a sudden Philip was translated and found preaching in another location. But one thing for sure, God Almighty said in the pages of His Bible, there is nothing too hard for Him. He's all powerful. There is nothing too hard for Him. He reads the minds and the hearts of us today. He knows who He's going to account worthy. And every day judgment is upon us by the way we live, the things we think, the way we act, the way we treat one another. Are we a real Christian, or are we filling a seat as a warm body? Those that are the real thing, something wonderful is going to happen. There is going to be protection for you. In Revelation 12, verse 13, I'll start to the end of the chapter. And when the dragon, and we know that Satan the devil, according to verse 9, saw that he was cast unto the earth, his short time was up. He knew he had but a short time, so he was cast out. He persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. That means physical and racial Israel and the church. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished, that means fattened with food, for a time, times, and half a time, the last 3.5 years from the face of the serpent. And the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, or the church. And according to Isaiah 59:19, a flood, a water or flood, is like an army, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. The army is coming after us, just like they did in ancient times when Israel was leaving Egyptian bondage. and a mountain range on both sides, and the Red Sea in front of them, and Pharaoh's army, the most powerful military force in human history up until that time, was right behind them. And they were panic-stricken. And Moses said, "Stand still and watch Jesus Christ, the God of the Old Testament. He will deliver you." And He did. And so it is, verse 16, the earth helped the woman. And the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood, the military, which the dragon cast out of his mouth. How do we know this is true saints? How do we know this is people with the Holy Spirit of God that is going to be protected for 3.5 years? Instead of just physical Israel, which without the Holy Spirit God is not dealing with except to fulfill Bible prophecy until He establishes His kingdom on this earth. Then He will deal with Israel as well as the other nations. Because verse 17 tells us a sad story. It said, "And the dragon was wroth." I mean, he was spitting nails. He was so mad with a woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed. The word remnant doesn't mean just a small number. It means the absent ones. The ones that did not, according to Jesus Christ, live in such conditions in their life that they could be accounted worthy to escape. And so here they had war made upon her seed. And what does her seed, this woman, do? Which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. But brethren, Jesus Christ said very specifically, and He inspired this book, He said, if you'll live it, if you will walk the walk, if you will live it every single day of your life, and you will never compromise, but you will take the things that you've learned from the pages of the Bible, you will incorporate them in your life. You will let the love of God proceed out from you. You will let joy enter into your life, and peace, long-suffering, and then faith. If you will allow all the fruit of God's Spirit, and He can see it in you, you will be accounted worthy to escape these things. The weather war and more that's coming upon planet Earth should not bring fear into one of our lives, not if we're living godly, because we have a promise that the rest of the world does not have. When they stand there and they see all the signs that are happening according to Luke 21, verse 25 and 26, and the oceans are roaring, and they are in perplexity, meaning they see no way out, no way for human survival. You see a way out. You will have human survival because of the Holy Spirit that resides inside of your mind. So, brethren, smile. We can know what is going to happen, and we can know what is happening. But we of all people can have the peace of God that passes all understanding. Will you receive it and display it?